Hey guys, and welcome back to my War of the Spark spoiler review. This is part 5, and kicking things off today, we have Bond of Discipline. It is 4 and a white for a sorcery. Tap all creatures your opponents control. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So it's a limited finisher, and a pretty big effect for that. You do pay for it though, 5 mana is quite a lot. In terms of standard playability though, this is very expensive and is not going to see any play. It's a 1 spark card. Next up, we have Law Rune Enforcer. It is white for a 1/2 human soldier, and you can pay 1 to tap it, and tap target creature with converted mana cost 2 or greater. So pretty powerful effect to have in limited. It always taps something bigger than itself, which is nice. In standard though, this effect is very, very weak, and it will be a 1 spark card. Martyr for the Cause is next, and it is 1 and a white for a 2/2 human soldier, and when it dies, proliferate. So pretty simple card for a proliferate deck in limited. However, playability wise in standard, this is another 1 spark card. Doesn't quite make the cut. Even in an all-in proliferate deck, this card is a little bit weak. Onto our first vehicle for today, we have Parhelion 2. It is 6 white, so 8 mana for a 5/5 legendary artifact vehicle. Crew 4, and for that you get flying, first strike, vigilance, and when it attacks it makes 2/4/4 white flying vigilant angel tokens that are attacking. So that's a lot. That's 14 power worth of attackers on the turn you get to untap with it, but it does cost 8 mana. So it's a really powerful card. The turns where you do get to play this, untap and attack, you probably will win. The problem is you're probably not getting to those turns very often. As sweet as it is, I'm going to have to give it a 1 spark rating for standard playability. Rally of Wings is 1 and a white for an instant. Untap all creatures you control. Creatures you control with flying get +2/+2 until end of turn. So we've got a combat trick, and a pretty decent one at that. The fact that it affects all your creatures is very, very good, and the added benefit of the +2/+2 on your flies is fantastic. But in terms of standard playability, this is definitely not something we're going to be interested in, so we'll get a 1 spark rating. And if you are looking for a combat trick in limited, this is pretty good. Sunblade Angel, 5 and a white for a 3/3 creature angel. It has flying, first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. That is a lot of text on an uncommon, but is it good enough to see standard play? Probably not. It dies to too many things in this format. At 6 mana, the 3/3 body is just not enough, even with all those keywords. It's going to get a 1 spark rating. Topple the Statue is 2 and a white for an instant. Tap target permanent. If it's an artifact, destroy it, draw a card. So it's a sideboard card, but it is a very, very good one. The ability to be able to cycle this card away and maybe tap down something that isn't the artifact that you are hunting for, just to get the card out of your hand, it makes it a little bit better than these effects that we normally get. For that, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 4 spark rating. I think this is a fantastic sideboard card. It is just dependent mainly on if there is going to be an artifact that we want to destroy with it. Obviously, if there's no artifacts in the format, the rating on this card would go down. But as it stands, if there's something like an Immortal Sun and you want to get rid of it, this is a very good way to do it. Onto blue, and we have Bond of Insight. It is a sorcery for 3 and a blue. Each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, and then you return 2 instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. So it's kind of like 4 mana sorcery draw 2, and 4 mana sorcery draw 2 that is conditional is going to be worse than that, and neither of those effects that I'd want to play in standard, so I'm going to give this a 1 spark rating. Contentious Plan is 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Proliferate and draw a card. I think this card sucks. Don't play it. 1 spark rating. Get it out of here. Eternal Skylord is 4 and a blue for a zombie wizard. It's a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you amass 2, and zombie tokens you control have flying. So it's another role player in the amass deck in limited. In standard, 5 mana for a 3/3, even with this effect, is just not good enough. It is a 1 spark card. God Eternal Kefnet, 2 blue for a legendary creature, zombie god. It is a 4/5 with flying, and you may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery this way, you can copy it, and you can cast that copy. The copy costs 2 less to cast. And when Kefnet dies or is exiled from the battlefield, it gets put into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So that's a lot of text, and a lot of it's good stuff, but there really isn't a deck in standard that wants to be doing this at the moment. Kefnet's a powerful card and all, 4 mana 4/5 flyer with upside, but yeah, the upside just kind of doesn't matter, and the decks that can run this card don't really want this card. Unfortunately, Kefnet's going to get a 1 spark rating. Jace's Triumph is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards. If you control a Jace Planeswalker, draw 3 cards instead. So it's divination with a minor upside, but the upside really isn't there because there just aren't any good Jace Planeswalkers in standard at the moment. I'm going to give this card a 1 spark rating. Kasmina, Enigmatic Mentor, is 3 and a blue for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Spells your opponent's cast that target a creature or Planeswalker you control cost 2 more to cast. -2, create a 2/2 blue wizard creature token, draw a card, then discard a card. card. So I actually like this card as a sideboard card out of the blue-red Phoenix deck. I think that first ability against some of the control decks is very powerful, and that second ability to create creatures to, beat them down quicker, but also draw through your deck, discarding Phoenixes and enacting your main game plan. This card's actually a pretty decent package. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3 spark rating. Kasmina's Transmutation is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and has base power and toughness 1/1. So mono blue is already running Deep Freeze as a way to deal with Niv Mizzet out of the sideboard. I could definitely see them swapping over to Transmutation because it's a whole mana cheaper. Now your opponent having an 0/4 is better for you than them having a 1/1 that can still attack, but I think the mana reduction will make this a better card. I'm going to go ahead and give this card a 4 spark rating. It will definitely see play out of the sideboard in those decks. Silent Submersible is blue for a 2/3 artifact vehicle. It has crew 2, and when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you draw a card. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that I do like. This is definitely the sort of vehicle that would see play if the metagame allowed it. It is cheap, it has good stats, it has a very good ability, and it's not too difficult to crew. The problem is it can be blocked. Some sort of evasion on this would have been nice, but I think you might have had to have increased the mana cost for that or decreased the power and toughness. As it stands, I think it is decent, but I don't know where it goes. I'm going to give it a 2 spark rating because it has all the elements of a good vehicle. I just don't know what deck it would go in at the moment. Spark Double is 3 and a blue for a creature illusion. It is a 0/0, and you may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, or an additional loyalty counter if it is a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if the permanent is legendary. So, a little bit confusing. There's a lot going on. This is our clone for the set, essentially. Unlike clone, this can only copy creatures you control, which does make it substantially worse, but it can enter as a copy of a legendary permanent you control, and you get to keep both of them. I don't think this card's very good. Clones tend not to be, and this is a worse version of clone in the fact that you can't copy your opponent's biggest threat. I'm going to have to give this a 1 spark rating. I just don't think it's going to see any play. Tamio's Epiphany, 3 and a blue for a sorcery, scry 4 and draw 2 cards. Pretty simple. The scry 4 is very good, the sorcery speed is very bad. For that, this will get 1 spark. I don't think this card is good enough for standard. Bond of Revival is 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until your next turn. So you can reanimate a big thing and hit them straight away, or you can bring back a utility creature and activate a tap ability in your opponent's turn. Unfortunately, 5 mana is a little bit too much to pay for this effect, so I'm going to have to give it a 1 spark rating. God Eternal Bontu is 3 black for a legendary creature, zombie god. It's a 5/6 with menace, and when he enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice any number of other permanents to draw that many cards, and when he dies, he goes back into your deck 3rd from the top, same effect that Kefnet had. How good is Bontu? 5 mana, 5/6 menace. You can maybe draw a card or 2. It's fine. I mean, if you get a card off it, as long as you're sacrificing something that's already gained you some amount of value, you're not really losing out too much. It does just die to pretty much anything, which I know is a bad way to look at cards, but I just don't see the upside in this one. I'm gonna have to give Bontu a 1 spark rating. Shriek Diver is 2 and a black for a zombie bird warrior. It has flying, it's a 2/1, and you can pay 1 to give it haste until end of turn. So essentially you can look at this as a 4 mana 2/1 flying with haste, and that really just doesn't cut it in standard. I'm going to give this card 1 spark. It's just not good enough. Toll of the Invasion, 2 and a black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card, and it has a mass 1. We were so close with this one, so close. I think at a mana less, this card would definitely be playable, but at 3, I think it's just a little bit too much. I'm gonna have to give it a 1 spark rating. Really unfortunate here, because this is exactly the sort of effect that I was talking about when I said I want a good card with a mass tacked on, but unfortunately at the cost that it is, it's just not gonna see any play. Vizier of the Scorpion is 2 and a black for a 1/1 zombie wizard. When it enters the battlefield, amass 1, and zombie tokens you control have Death Touch. So this is the Death Touch Lord of this cycle of cards. Like the other ones, it is super sweet in the amass deck in limited, but in standard, it's just not good enough to make the cut. Vizier of the Scorpion gets 1 spark. Onto red, and we have Bolt Bend. It is 3 and a red for an instant. This spell costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Change the target of a spell or ability with a single target. So I can see this being a sideboard card coming in against control decks from either the blue-red Phoenix and Drake style decks, as well as the green-red Stompy decks that are out there. If they control a Drake or a Rekindling Phoenix, this thing costs 1 and is a fantastic way to protect their creatures. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2 spark rating. I think as a sideboard card, it may see a little bit of play, especially in those archetypes. Bond of Passion is 4 red for a sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. Bond of Passion deals 2 damage to any other target. So normally you'd pay 3 mana for this sort of effect, so essentially we're paying 3 mana on top of that for a shock tacked onto this card. That's definitely too expensive for standard, so there I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. Though in limited, this sort of effect can be powerful if your deck is built around it. Do keep it in mind that you can lose 2 creatures when your opponent taps out to play a Bond of Passion, so it is just something to be aware of there. Chain Whip Cyclops is 5 mana for a 4/4 Cyclops Warrior, and you can pay 3 and a red, target creature can't block this turn. This is definitely a limited card. Over there, the stats are okay for the price that you pay, and the effect can be very, very relevant, but in standard, it's a little bit too expensive for what you get. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. Chandra, Fire Artisan, is 2 red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from her, she deals that much damage to target opponent or planeswalker. You can +1 to exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and then the -7, exile the top 7 cards from your library. You may play them this turn. So similar to other Chandras we've seen in standard, she does provide card draw in red, which is very good. However, she is missing the all-important ability to deal with creatures that are in play. Her passive ability may be able to pick off planeswalkers and shoot your opponent with some incidental damage here and there, but I don't think that's enough to really make this card good. I'm actually going to have to go ahead and give it a 1 spark rating. Unless something drastically changes in the metagame and people start playing planeswalkers instead of creatures, I can't really see this card seeing any play. Chandra's Pyrohelix is 1 and a red for an instant. It deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. So this is actually a reprint. We have seen it before. It didn't see play then, and I can't see it being played now. I'm going to go ahead and give this card a 1 spark rating. Chandra's Triumph is 1 and a red for an instant. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. If you control a Chandra planeswalker, it deals 5 damage to that permanent instead. In terms of removal, it is an upgrade over what we've got if you can deal the 5 damage. However, I don't think the Chandra planeswalker is playable in standard, which means you're only going to be dealing 3, which makes this a worse lightning strike. I'm going to give this a 1 spark rating. Until we get a good Chandra, this won't see any play. Demolish is 3 and a red for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact or land. Well, it's a lot of utility in one card, but unfortunately this card just sucks. You're paying too much for either effect, and most of the time it doesn't even matter. Don't draft this card, don't sleeve this card, don't do anything with this card. If you open this card, throw it away immediately. It gets 1 spark. If you play this card, your win percentage will go down. Dreadhorde Twins, 3 and a red for a 2/2 zombie jackal warrior. When it enters the battlefield, amass 2, and zombie tokens you control have trample. So it's 4 mana for 2 2/2s, which in limited is pretty good. And one of those 2/2s has trample, and one of those 2/2s could possibly be bigger. This lord, like the other ones, provides an effect to your tokens. Don't think the effect is as good, but the card itself is actually pretty decent. As for standard, it is overcosted for what you get, and it's going to get a 1 spark rating. Finale of Promise is X red for a mythic sorcery. You may cast up to 1 instant and or sorcery card from your graveyard with converted mana cost X or less without paying their mana costs. If you cast them, exile them, and if X is 10 or more, you copy them twice and can choose new targets for the copies. There's a big box of text to flashback a couple of spells. You're paying 1 additional mana on each of the spells, which actually isn't too bad because you do get 2. However, if you've only got an instant or a sorcery in there, it gets a little bit more expensive. You've got to have a plan for this. This is a combo card. You won't just put this in a deck and play it as a value spell to get a recursive effect from your previous spells. Look, I think people are probably going to play it. I don't know where they're going to play it. There's a lot going on here, and as a first glance, it's really hard to assess cards with this much going on. I'm going to give it a 3 spark rating. I think it's going to go somewhere. It's better than the usual big mythic dumb red card that we get, but I just don't know what we're doing with it at the moment. Ilhag the Raise Boar is 3 red for a legendary creature, Boar God. It's a 6/6 with trample, and when it attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. You return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step, and he has the same ability as the rest of the gods. If it dies or is exiled from the battlefield, it goes into its owner's library 3rd from the top. I want to be the first to say all hail the pig god. I think this card is pretty damn good. A lot of people are comparing this card to Through the Breach. Now, Through the Breach is an instant, and that creature that you threw the breach in gets to attack the turn that you cast Through the Breach. Ilhag, you do have to wait a turn before you get to get that attack in and put a creature into play. However, Rhythm of the Wild does exist, and there is a Domri who also gives creatures haste. With that in mind, I think there's enough support to make this card very good, and you're going to take a lot of explosive damage that you weren't expecting out of nowhere. I'm going to give Ilhag a 4 spark rating. I think this is the big red card that the green-red decks were looking for, and I think it's going to see a fair bit of play. Jaya's Greeting is 1 and a red for an instant. It deals 3 damage to a creature, and you scry 1. So right now in Standard, this card is a little bit outclassed by cards like Lava Coil, and I think until those cards rotate out of Standard, this probably won't see any play. Though in saying that, I am still going to give it a 2 spark rating because you could put it into a deck, it would perform well, but I think until those other cards rotate out, we won't be seeing a lot of it. Next up is Jaya herself. So we have Jaya, Venerated Fire Mage, 4 and a red for a 5 loyalty uncommon planeswalker. If another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 instead, and you can -2 to have Jaya deal 2 damage to any target. So if that first line of text applied to Jaya, I think it would be very, very good being able to lightning bolt things. Unfortunately, because she doesn't affect herself, she does only deal 2 damage with that down tick. I think she's going to be a pretty decent removal spell type planeswalker in limited, but in standard, I'm going to have to give her a 1 spark rating. I just don't think she's good enough. Raging Crunch is 2 and a red for a 4/3 beast creature that can't attack alone. It has a fantastic name, but that's about it. You are getting a 1 spark rating. On to the last red card for today, and we have Turret Ogre. It is 3 and a red for a 4/3 Ogre Warrior with Reach, and when he enters the battlefield, if you control another creature with power 4 or greater, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this is another limited card. It is understated, and it won't see any standard play. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi is 3 green for an instant. Put 9 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a legendary 0/0 elemental creature with haste named Vitu-Ghazi. It's still a land. Now 5 mana instants, they really do need to win you the game, and this one kind of can, but in the form of a creature, which does make it susceptible to combat and removal. Now I really don't think this is going to see any standard play, but this is definitely a card to look out for in limited. People are going to cast this at the end of your turn, and you are going to die. They are going to cast it in combat and eat your biggest thing. Definitely a card to be aware is in the format. Thank God it is rare and not uncommon. As for standard, like I said, it is a little bit too clunky to use as a win condition. I'm going to have to give it a 1 spark rating. Bond of Flourishing is 1 and a green for a sorcery. You look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in any order, and then you gain 3 life. So we've seen these effects before, and they are usually on the cusp of playability. This one I think is a little bit better than what we've had. Revealing a permanent, you get to pick from a variety of different things, which is nice. Most of the time in a deck that has this card in it, you're going to hit off it. The 3 life is quite good as well, because you are spending 2 mana to do this instead of develop your board, so it does give you a bit of a buffer there. If there is a deck that wants this effect, this is definitely the version of it they're going to pick. I'm going to give it a 2 spark rating. Right now I don't know where it goes, but it definitely could see some play in the future. Centaur Nurturer is 3 and a green for a 2/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. A limited card, it's got a good body to block, and it provides you with mana, so it does double duty. I like it there. I don't like it in standard. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. Challenger Troll is 4 and a green for a 6/5, and each creature you control with power 4 or greater can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. This is a limited card, and it is going to receive a 1 spark rating. Forced Landing is 1 and a green for an instant. Put target creature with flying on the bottom of its owner's library. So this is a limited sideboard card. In standard, we do have effects like this that people do want to play, but they are better than this one. So we're going to give it a 1 spark rating, but do remember it's there if you do need this sort of removal in limited. God Eternal Ronus, 3 green for a legendary creature zombie god, 5/5 death touch, and when he enters the battlefield, you double the power of each other creature you control and give those creatures vigilance until end of turn. He's also got the same death ability as the other gods, so instead of dying, he gets put 3rd from the top in your library. This is a pretty powerful card. I think it has a very specific home in a not particularly great deck at the moment, but I would love to see somebody curve a Steel Leaf Champion on 2 into a Steel Leaf Champion on 3 and then hit you for 20 after playing a Ronus on 4. Now, the mono green Stompy deck does have its weaknesses. That's why it doesn't see a lot of play, but I think this is a pretty sweet pickup for that deck, and I am going to give it a 2 spark rating because that deck still does see some play. Crunch Wrangler is 1 and a green for a 2/1 human warrior with trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. As for limited, this is a pretty decent 2-drop. It can get bigger and grow into the late game, so that's good. Normally your 2-drops get outclassed pretty quickly, whereas this one will get bigger as your game goes on. In terms of standard playability, he is a little bit slow, and I am going to have to give him a 1 spark rating. Nissa's Triumph is green for a sorcery. Search your library for 2 basic forest cards. If you control a Nissa Planeswalker, you can search for 3 land cards instead. It's just weak. It's weak and it's awkward. If you don't have the Nissa, it's really bad. If you do have the Nissa, it's fine, I guess. In standard, it's going to get a 1 spark rating. There aren't any lands that you really want to make this card worth playing. Outside of standard, yeah, I guess it can get you utility lands and whatnot, but even then, you still have to have a Nissa Planeswalker and 2 green mana available. I just don't think this card is very good. Nissa Who Shakes the World is 3 green for a 5 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. +1 loyalty, you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on a non-creature land you control. You untap it, it becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste and vigilance. It's still a land. Now assume it says non-creature, so you can't stack the counters and make 1 big land creature. And then her -8, you get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. Then you can search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. This is an interesting card, but I actually don't think it's that good. By the time you get to 5, the additional ramp from that first ability kind of doesn't matter anymore. I mean, you've already played your 5 mana Planeswalker, so what else are you trying to cast? As for untapping and making lands, sure, that's good, but I can't really think of a green-based deck in Standard right now that would rather play Nissa when it still has access to Vivian Reed. I'm going to have to give it a 1 spark rating. I just think it's underpowered. Steady Aim is 1 and a green for an instant. Untap target creature, it gets +1/+4 and gains reach until end of turn. So this is a limited combat trick. This is not the sort of thing we want in Standard. It's going to get a 1 spark rating. And our last green card is Thundering Ceratok. It is 4 and a green for a 4/5 trample, and when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. This is another limited card. We're not really interested in this effect. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. Domri, Anarch of Bolas, 1 red-green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Creatures you control get +1/+0. The tick up, add red or green creature spells you cast this turn can't be counted, and then -2, target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. It's a very simple card. I think the red-green decks are going to be pretty happy running a couple of copies of this. It helps them ramp out their big stuff, and it makes it bigger, which means they can end games quicker. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3 spark rating. I think this card's pretty good. Domri's Ambush, red-green for a sorcery. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. This is removal for red-green in limited. It is very powerful because it puts a counter on your creature, and that counter sticks around, so you get a permanent buff as well as removing a threat. It's definitely not standard playable. I am going to give it a 1 spark rating there, but I think it's very good in limited. Dovin, Hand of Control, is 2 hybrid white-blue for a 5 loyalty planeswalker at uncommon. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, and then -1 until your next turn. Prevent all damage that will be dealt to and by a permanent an opponent controls. Now this is a really good control card. It locks down something, it slows your opponent down unless you get to your late game. I think this card is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to give it a 5-star rating. I'm definitely going to have a lot of fun playing this deck in Esper control decks and variants similar to that. Enter the God Eternals is 2 blue-black for a sorcery at rare. It deals 4 damage to a creature and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Target player then puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard and then you amass 4. So that's actually a really interesting card. As a baseline effect, it is a 5 mana 4/4 creature that deals 4 to another creature and you gain 4 life. I mean, we play Ravenous Chupacabra, that's a 4 mana 2/2 that kills something. This is kind of a 5 mana 4/4 that kills something. I don't think this is as good as that card. I'm probably going to have to give this card a 1 spark rating, though I do like it and the power level definitely is there. I just don't know who is going to play this or where you're going to be able to fit this card in. Next, we have Feather the Redeemed, red-white-white for a legendary creature angel. It is a 3/4 flyer, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, you exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard and then return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So I think this card is actually kind of average. It's a 3/4 flyer for 3, the relevant text there being angel. It does receive a buff from Lyra and it does fit into the Angel's deck that already exists. I just don't think it's as good as the Resplendent Angel or the Seraph of the Scales, so I kind of don't think there's a place for it in Standard. I'm going to have to give Feather a 1 spark rating. It's just an average angel card. Living Twister is red, red, green. For a creature elemental, it is a 2/5, and you can pay 1 and a red to discard a land card. Living Twister deals 2 damage to any target. Then you can pay green and return a tapped land you control to its owner's hand. It's just a little slow. Like, I love cards like this with a bunch of abilities on them that make engines for decks. Unfortunately, Standard isn't really a place where cards like this actually get an opportunity to shine. I'm gonna have to give Living Twister a 1 spark rating, even though this is one of my favorite cards in the set. Niv Mizzet Reborn. White, blue, black, red, green for a legendary creature, Dragon Avatar. It is a 6/6 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them, put the chosen cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So absolute best case scenario, you have perfect mana on turn 5, you get a 6/6 flying Dragon Avatar, and you draw 10 cards. If that was the case, this would be the best card I've ever seen. As it stands, it's super awkward to cast. You are never casting this on curve in Standard, and you are probably never drawing more than 2 or 3 cards from that ability. Unfortunately, it is going to get a 1 spark rating in Standard, but I have high hopes that this card will do a lot of work in formats like Commander. Pledge of Unity is 1 green white. For an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. You gain 1 life for each creature you control. This card's actually very, very powerful. In Limited, it makes your creatures just bigger than your opponents, allowing you to win combats that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to. It also gains you a bunch of life, so in a race situation, it will definitely help you pull ahead. In terms of Standard playability, I think it's actually pretty good there too. In the green-white tokens deck, it turns your tokens into real threats while gaining you a bunch of life in the process. Whether or not you'd want to play this over a card like Unbreakable Formation, I'm not 100% sure yet, but in the green-white deck, I definitely think it's something to consider. I'm going to give it a 3 spark rating. The power level is definitely there. Just comes down to a choice between which one of these two you'd like to have. Row's Outburst is 2 blue-red for an instant. It deals 3 damage to any target. Then you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and 1 into your graveyard. So this card seems pretty sweet in the Phoenix deck. It gives you some card selection. It allows you to put a Phoenix or a Jumpstart card into the graveyard and pump up the power of your Drakes as well. I'm going to give this card a 3 spark rating. I don't think they're going to run a full set of these, but maybe 1 or 2 in this here and there. I could definitely see that happening. Ral, Storm's Conduit is 2 blue-red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Ral deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. +2, scry 1. -2, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This card is pretty decent. It acts kind of like a mini Niv Mizzet in the decks that would run that. You can fire off a volley of spells and shoot down your opponent quite quickly. Unlike Niv Mizzet, it doesn't attack your opponent for 5, and it also doesn't block and keep you alive. If that was all this card did, I would probably say that it was fine. It would get a 2 spark rating. It would slot into some blue-red decks that already exist and would see a little bit of play. I have to, however, mention its synergy with Expansion Explosion, because it can create an infinite combo that, if undisrupted, you do get to go off infinitely and kill your opponent. Because of that, I think people will try to do this a lot, and you will see this pop up, especially on MTG Arena, and for that I'm going to bump it up to a 4 spark rating. I think you're going to see a lot of people playing around with this card and trying to make it work. How good this actually is, I don't know. I'd hate to be in a green deck and they go and do this to me, because there is absolutely no way those sort of decks can deal with this. Roalesk Apex Hybrid, 2 green-green-blue, legendary creature, human mutant. It is a 4/5 with flying and trample. When it enters the battlefield, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on another creature you control, and when it dies, you proliferate, then proliferate again. I think this card's actually really, really good. I'd love to play 1 or 2 copies of this in my Sultai deck as a curve topper. It's a 5 mana 4/5 with flying and trample all by itself. That is kind of scary, and you do need to kill it. If you do kill it, one of my other creatures who got 2 +1/+1 counters, or was a Jadelight Ranger, or a Branch Walker, or a Hydroic will get a bunch of counters, and will get a bunch of counters again. I think this card is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to give it 5 sparks. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Next, Saheeli Sublime Artificer, 1 hybrid blue-red for a 5 loyalty planeswalker at uncommon. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, and then -2, target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Now, this is another really sweet card. There seems to be a lot of things that the blue-red spells deck get to pick up from this set, and this is kind of another really good one. While you're churning through your deck trying to get your Phoenixes into play and pumping up the power of your Drakes, you can then get to spit out a bunch of servos if this card goes unanswered. Then, if you do find one of those big creatures, you can turn a servo into a Drake or a Phoenix or whatever and hit your opponent with it. This card is very, very sweet. I'm going to give it a 4 spark rating. I can't think of a bad thing to say about it. Solar Blaze is 2 red white for a sorcery. Each creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So it's a 4 mana red white board wipe, right? Well, not exactly, but I think it does a good enough impression to definitely see some play in standard. If I was running a Jeskai control deck, I would probably consider running a few copies of this because it is efficient enough, and at 4 mana to have this effect, it's very, very strong. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3 spark rating. I definitely think it'll see some play, though I don't think it's the game-changing board wipe we've been waiting for. And our last multicolored card is Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. 2 green, blue for a 5 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to discard cards or sacrifice permanents. +1 loyalty, choose a non-land card name, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put all cards with the chosen name into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and she has -3, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So Tamiyo is a value planeswalker, and those 2 abilities combined with the 4 mana casting cost and that first passive ability, I like this card a lot. Now, she's not going to come down and just straight up win you a game, but those abilities will definitely add up to something that's going to give you a big advantage over the course of, say, 5 or 6 turns. I'm going to give Tamiyo a 5 spark rating. I think this card is fantastic, and I think it's going to see a fair bit of play. Firemind Vessel is a 4 mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for 2 mana of different colors. Now, this isn't really a card for standard. It is a little bit slow, and there isn't any decks that want it, so I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. But in formats like Commander, I think this thing's going to be pretty decent, and we'll see a fair bit of play there. Karn, the Great Creator, is 4 colorless mana for a 5 loyalty planeswalker at rare. Activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness, each equal to the converted mana cost. And then -2, you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. So this is a very difficult card to assess. Planeswalkers are hard enough as it is, colorless planeswalkers even more so. So the previous Karn that we had has seen a bunch of play as a 1 or a 2 of, showing up in all sorts of decks because as colorless you can put it wherever you like. Planeswalkers just inherently provide card advantage, so being able to slot that into any deck is very, very powerful. So this Karn is very, very interesting. He synergizes very well with artifacts, but he is also a hate card against artifacts as well. So if an artifact deck does arise in standard, this will definitely be a card that you'll want to play in that deck because it enables your game plan, but it also shuts down your opponents in mirror matches. Right now, I don't think this card's going to see a lot of play in standard. It doesn't really synergize very well with anything else, though in the future, it's definitely powerful enough to keep our eye on. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. I do like this card a lot, but for standard, I just don't think it's got what it takes. Outside of standard, however, in formats like Modern and Legacy, I think this thing's going to be an absolute powerhouse. There are decks out there that are entirely constructed of artifacts, and this thing absolutely hoses those decks and will be fantastic in those formats. And our last card for today is Saheeli's Silverwing. It is 4 mana for a 2/3 flying artifact creature Drake, and when it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top card of your opponent's library. Interesting effect. I like seeing stuff like this because it is different to what we normally get. Unfortunately for standard, it is very weak, and it will get a 1 spark rating. So thanks again for watching, guys, and if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like button, and if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I also stream MTG Arena over on Twitch at Deathrite Squid, so please check me out there. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video. Raging Crunch. The amount of times I said Raisin Crunch. This card sounds like a breakfast cereal. I still love him though.